Hi, everybody, and welcome to this DMTV episode, which is called On Thin Ice. Sorry for the slight delay. In fact, we had some connection issues, and that's the beauty of the, live streaming. For the better or for the worse, and sometimes technology helps, other times it doesn't help. I would like to welcome Carlos Pereira, from the Club of Rome for the beginning of this program, which we called On Thin Ice, and the first episode, which is entitled "It Cracks Appear." Carlos Pereira is just an international senior expert in environmental affairs, and I would say that he has a real keen interest in all what is concerned about cultural transformation. And I've been lucky enough to be meeting Carlos a number of years ago at the Club of Rome seminar in Florence. And ever since, we have been cherished a lot of very interesting and animated discussions on a better world that we would like to be having. I know that from the control direction, there will be a very short video before starting our animated talk with Carlos, a short video by David Graeber, who is quite an interesting thinker, who will be really pinpointing on the key issues that we're going to be discussing this evening together. So if we can just bring it on.
The problems with the intellectual left is the very idea that it would coalesce around, two sort of charismatic theorists. We're talking very practical questions. We're talking about questions of of vision and direction. What we have at the moment is we shouldn't be arguing with each other about how we feel about the role of the state. That's just a token of our own irrelevance. What we should be talking about is how to take a part in the arguments about the fundamental changes that are going to happen in our society in the wake of this. I mean, the last poll I saw showed that 9% of people in the UK, for example, want to put things back to normal. People are demanding a fundamental change in our relationship to each other and our relationship to nature. We need to make ourselves relevant to that debate. Now, as it happens, most of the radical ideas of social transformation have been coming out of the left. But that's the important thing. We should be dividing up, around our visions. What is the best way that we can transform society to make it less incredibly violently alienating and oppressive and still get to zero carbon by 2025 or at most 2030, so that we're not all underwater in 10 years. These are the things that we're supposed to be arguing about. But I mean, in a way, it's a mercy that this happened, because it happened early enough that there's still time to turn things around. It's a kind of a warning shot of things to come. And the left are the only people who've been thinking about radically different visions. So we need to get over these kind of squabbles and start thinking about what it is we're actually proposing.
So what are we really proposing? I would say that David Graeber really pointed out all the different elements that I would like to be discussing with you, Carlos. Alienation, transformation and change, vision and direction, and the fundamental change that we are needing. Now, it says that, in fact, we are early enough, and that's something that we should be discussing. As you know, I mean, the Club of Rome has been warning for since 1972 about the alarm of climate change, and I'm not sure that we are early enough. But let's focus on I would like to be bringing up the different questions, all in a row. And we are in a pandemic, Carlos. We are in a pandemic, and I would say that this pandemic is not a consequence. I mean, it's just we have to be looking at the roots and the causes of it. Like this pandemic is just exposed. It's just reveal the cracks and the loopholes and the gaps which were already in our health system, social and community infrastructures, a global economy full of injustices, which is fueled by neoliberal practices. Now, somehow, when governments have to be dealing with buildings and bridges, it's an asset, it's a tangible asset. But when we have to be talking about a vaccination program, where is it in the financial statement of a government? It's not easily recordable. But even though it's intangible, it's any less an essential asset for the society. Now we have been witnessing that public health system have struggled to provide basic pandemic related services. We have been witnessing that somehow COVID-19 cases and that have not been counted consistently. We have been seeing a lot of failures in institutional organizational protocols. Now, the question is, who is accountable? Who is liable? I mean, blame lie within the way how government budgeting and report works, or there is a broader question to be brought up, like why can't we have a better world as we can imagine that?
Wow, that's an easy question, right? I would take it from the point of view of how do we try to make sense of where we are, or even where are we now? I'm thinking in the audience and the people around the world who have been, living through this period of pandemics and feeling very bad about that, of course, because it is a tragedy. Close to 2.5 million people have died from this, and it's worldwide and it's everywhere. And even if the vaccines are coming, it's far from obvious that we will get soon back to something which we could call normal. Supposing that what we had before the pandemic could be defined as normal. It was what we had, but was it normal? Was it the normality we want to have? So before going into other questions, like, for instance, who is accountable or how does this work, or questions about vaccination, because we are seeing that the process of vaccination, I mean, the good news have been that there has been the development of actually many different vaccines, but the process of vaccination itself is revealing many things, and particularly the huge inequality in the world. I mean, again, in the process of vaccination, the rich world is getting safe much faster than most of the world. But before going into that and many other aspects, I would try to ask the question of where are we, and how do we make sense of what is happening, of the pandemic, and where we were before and where we could go from here. And I think I feel myself a bit lost, without, I think nobody can pretend now to have the recipes to go forward, the easy recipes, the narrative of progress and of human development is, I think, broken, and it's broken since long, but the pandemic has revealed that in a stronger way, in a much more, it has manifested that in a much stronger than before. And this means many things. One of them, for instance, is how do we conceive our relationship with viruses, and what is the place of viruses in our life, and what do we know about them? And I think one of the things that the pandemic has revealed is that we don't know much. We don't know much, and we don't know what role they have played in the history of evolution. And this is how it is so difficult to have a response. In the end, the response we are taking is to develop a vaccine, which is more or less the same we did with previous epidemics. But something is missing, which is, we used at the beginning of the pandemic the concept, the metaphor of the war on virus. Well, you cannot wage a war on viruses. Viruses are everywhere. There are many more. There are many more than humans. Many more than humans, and they are probably an initial piece, but still here, of the history of life on Earth. So the framing, I think we need to shift many of our framings through which we make sense of what we are living in. And just to give an example, I think this is happening. Just to give an example, and I come back to you with that. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, was saying 3 years ago, he was saying, oh, we had 30 years of the strongest economic growth in the history of humanity, great advancements in terms of science, of the technological development, etc., with two collateral effects. And it was literal collateral effects. And the collateral effects were climate change and the growth of inequality. But the framing was everything is going reasonably well, and we had fantastic technology, fantastic science, and we have just to take care of two collateral effects. Those collateral effects are, of course, not collateral in my view at all, because they are self-inflicted existential threats. But that was the framing 3 years ago. And now, in a speech at the University of Columbia last December, he started saying literally the following: humanity is waging a war on nature, and this is a suicide.
That's quite something.
So that's a big shift in the framing, right? Said by the Secretary General of the UN.
Very much so.
And I think this framing, the second one, is more correct than the first. And it's hard to face that, because but it's not harder than live in the pandemic. So living the pandemic for almost everybody, probably for everybody on Earth, but of course it has been, again, very unequal. The way we have lived in the pandemic is necessarily conditioned by other factors, and in particular our resources, our individual and family resources. It has been, I think, very hard, and it's still very hard for many people in many places, in many ways, because basically we have been saying to keep alive, we have to stop being alive. We have to be confined, which, by the way, is exactly the same thing that we were doing with epidemics since the beginning of time. So from that point of view, this is also why I say we don't know so much about viruses. And it's not me saying that, it's also the WHO reporting on the lessons learned from SARS. So in 2007, the WHO published a report on that. And one of the conclusions was, well, the techniques which have been most useful to deal with the epidemics, with the SARS epidemics, have been those that we know since long, have been techniques, developed centuries ago, but especially consolidated in the 19th century. And the science of the 21st century, they were saying that in 2007, was not contributing so much to a different strategy to deal with the viruses. This is still the case. This is still the case. The recipe has been confinement, isolation, which is what I call, in a way, stop being alive, or just be partially alive, because life is relationships. So we had to stop that and wait for a vaccine. I think this is very hard to face that. So facing the fact that we are in a context, in a framing of self-inflicted existential threats is not harder than that. It's actually COVID, in a way. The COVID could be the way we reveal, we open, we cut the veil, and we face that reality at last, that we already know. I mean,
and that takes me to the next question, Carlos. Like always, you're so inspirational to me. As you were saying, the pandemic has attacked the core of our lives. And I would say that responses have been quite different individually and socially, very diverse, and some of them even undeniably admirable. I will give you some example. In the UK, for example, 10 million people have volunteered to help the others, well, communities, vulnerable segments of the societies. And that's my question would be, what motivates people to help, to help others? And then, but we also have seen, an increase of depression, of anxiety. Some people, because of the fear of contagion, have somehow distanced themselves. They have been developing like obsessive thoughts, and that gives us, as you were saying before, the value of relationships, like how vital they are, how we nurture ourselves through relationships, and it's something that somehow we have put aside because of material achievements, right? And then there have been other interesting phenomena. For example, a number of small businesses have been losing their job, yet there have been very positive reactions. Unilever has committed to be helping small and medium sized suppliers by extending cash loans. So somehow we will be needing more of this creative thinking. So is it one way forward, a new creative thinking, helping each other and through relationships and supporting each other? What would you say about that?
well, it's interesting that you asked what motivated people to help each other,
Yes.
because my answer is, well, just being people. I mean,
Well,
being alive. This is a fundamental, and again, I know that the dominant framing and the dominant stories we are told every day are about competition, right?
yeah, that's it.
Because we are supposed to, if we compete with each other, we are supposed to do our best, and then everything will go well, because that will create benefits which will be distributed to everybody. Well, that life doesn't work that way, sorry to say. It's more than time to say that life is not based on competition. It's based on relationships, on the fact that everything is connected with everything else. And this is not, I mean, this is also a cultural and spiritual tradition, if you want, and this is ancient wisdom for sure. But this is also science, and science, I mean, modern science has been in some ways very slow to rediscover things that we know since long, and one particular example is that the longest study about health and what are the conditions for people to have good health and have a good life is a study which started in the early 20th century, done by the Harvard University, and which is still going on and following people during decades. And those people were in their were young, in their 20s and younger when the study started, and many of them have died, but not everybody, and they have integrated new people along the line. And what is the conclusion? So to the question, what makes good life and what makes health? What is the most important factor of health? The answer is so obvious that it is, in a way, a shame that we have to come to this point to rediscover what we knew since the very beginning, because the answer is the quality of relationships. So it's there since the very beginning. It's about life, is about relationships. So you don't need to motivate people to care for each other. That's obviously what a mother does with her kids, but that's the normal thing. What is not normal is that we are trained to think that the world is about competition. And so many times we see on the TV, these wonderful documentaries about nature, where the most important aspect which is looked at is the predators, and the fact that animals eat other animals, and in a way the lesson learned from that is life is about competition. And I would say no, life has a tragic side that we cannot avoid, but life is basically about taking care of each other, providing for each other, and collaborating. And the tragic side is that to keep alive, we have ourselves to eat living beings. Even the most strictest vegan is eating life, because we cannot do otherwise. So that tragedy is there, but we should start recognizing the tragedy which is there, in that we have to destroy life to keep life. And what is interesting is that, generally speaking, ancient cultures did that. They recognized that tragedy, and they gave a tribute to, and they didn't see life as disconnected, as separated, and they didn't see themselves as separate from nature. While we do. So maybe what the COVID has revealed is what is essential.
Yeah.
And we rediscovered, but we know that since the beginning of times, that what is essential is the relationships and taking care of each other.
Yeah.
And the people we called the essential workers during the pandemic,
Sure,
are those who take care of others, whose job is to take care of others, whether in health services or in social services or in logistics or in or in the police and whatever. We call them, but will we keep that? Will we keep calling them essential? Because, by the way, they might be essential. They are essential, but we don't pay them as if they were. And what do we do with those are the jobs we couldn't even imagine to interrupt, because everything would have collapsed without them. But the rest, many other economic processes could be interrupted and are not so essential. Does the economic processes we have, do they take into account that what is essential and what is not?
absolutely. That's quite an interesting point, Carlos, to be reconsidered. And I would like to ask you, if we look at COVID-19 responses and approaches, I mean the effect in the other continents. For example, there is a strikingly disparity fatalities between the East Asian countries and the Western countries. I was just collecting some interesting figures. They belong, they date back to last July. Still, they are very interesting. Like, for example, Japan had reported 7.8 deaths per million, followed by South Korea 5.8, and Singapore 4.6, in China 3.2. And the most remarkably of all was Vietnam, 0 deaths. And by contrast, in Belgium, we had like 846 confirmed, and the United Kingdom 669, and let's say 600, whatever. A very success story relates to New Zealand. Their lockdown was remarkably, stringent and very effective. Because of early decisive reaction surveillance systems. On the contrary, Latin America was the epicenter of the coronavirus pandemics, and if we think about, for example, the Brazilian president, even called COVID-19 as a measly like a cold, whatever. And if we also look at the US, I mean, it's that response is kind of disjointed. Now, how would you explain that? What's your standpoint about it?
Well, I don't have an explanation for that. I might have some hypotheses, but it's not to me to explain, of course. But I think this is a very, very interesting question, Stefania, which again reveals COVID has been a fantastic way of revealing our blind spots. And let me tell you a personal anecdote talking about blind spots. In 2006, I went to Helsinki in a flight which was going on, stopping at Helsinki, but going on to Asia after that. And the flight was half full of Asian passengers. I think it was going to Beijing, but I'm not sure of that. So maybe they were Chinese or from other Asian countries. And most, if not all of them, were wearing masks. We're talking about 2006. And they were wearing masks because of SARS. That epidemics which we didn't get here. And I remember perfectly well the feeling I had, the feeling of sort of compassion for them. Oh, God, these poor people are wearing masks. And I remember as well the feeling that, oh, but this will not happen to us. Which, of course, was a blind spot on my side. I was blind to the possibility that it could happen to us, and actually it happened. And it happened in a way that we have seen many more, as you just explained, many more victims in Western countries. Basically, yeah, the worst rankings are for European and American countries, while the rankings, the ratios have been much better in this pandemic in Asian countries. So one element of explanation could be that they were much better prepared because they had gone through several epidemics, so they were already prepared. That could be an important factor. I mean, they were used to wear masks anyway. I would discard, some people, when I have this discussion on why did the Asian countries why were they more successful than us in dealing with the pandemic? What I hear often is that, oh, but they are cheating with the figures, with the statistics. You cannot trust what China says, and so on. And I completely discard that. I don't believe that at all. And another element of explanation is, but in Asian countries, everybody behaves. So the government says something, and everybody behaves accordingly, and they don't cheat the rules. And that second element points to something which could be part of the explanation, in the sense that their concept of the individual and the collective is different from ours. But that doesn't mean, because the usual translation of that is that we have in Europe we have human rights, we love these focus on the individuals, and we cannot be like them, and we think that because of this individualism, this is what gives us democracy. And I would question that the point where we are in the history of Europe is the point where we have the highest level of democracy. I would question that, and I would question in particular the idea that individualism or extreme individualism leads to a better situation for almost everybody, because I think it's the opposite. So actually, I would say the individual and the collective are not do not form a dilemma. You cannot be an individual without the collective, because life is about relationships. So maybe there is something to learn, but are we ready for that? Maybe there is something to learn from Asian cultures and Asian governance, way of governing themselves in the context of this pandemic. Are we ready to learn from that? I'm not sure, because we prefer to discard that they know more than we know, that they might be more advanced than we are. Maybe the center of the world is not here. I mean, I'm completely sure the center of the world is now basically everywhere, but it's definitely not anymore in the West. But maybe because they have cultural elements which help them dealing as a collective with situations like this. And just to finish on that, there might be another element, which is Eastern medicine. And this is something we're trying to start to research with some friends and colleagues from China, in particular about what about the influence of traditional Chinese medicine in the way people are able to deal with a pandemic like COVID. Is there and this is again completely out of our radar. We don't even consider the possibility that this could have a role, but maybe there is a role. Traditional Chinese medicine is a much more holistic way of conceiving health. It's not the siloed way of the Western medicine that we put every organ in a box and we address the boxes separately. It's the human as a whole, and the human as a whole with the relationships again. So these may be hints, but that question I think is essential again.
It is. It's about learning. It's about interconnectedness. It's absolutely, fully agree. I can see that there is a question from the audience, from Andrew. He's asking if they can set up and build temporary hospitals in weeks, then there is no excuse of overcrowding. For university education, more doctors, and a health system available at the point of use. Healthcare could even be exported as not-for-profit system to develop highly skilled, multifaceted professionals in each country's health system. So, well, that's something that they have been, I mean, the Chinese have been able to be coming up with. Like, I like that somehow.
But the comment, I mean, I agree with the comment, and it points to something which again is should be part of the essential, and which is health. I mean, there is nothing more essential than health. Pretty obvious, right? Because and it's not only about health systems. I mean, it is for sure, and we are talking about so those results, those outcomes in countries where, in particular, public health systems have not been at the top, to say the least, have not been at the top of political agendas in the last 10, 12, or 15 years, or even more. It depends if you look, depending on the countries. But for instance, in Spain, I mean, after the crisis, the financial crisis in 28, public health budgets were cut dramatically. And come on, you cannot pretend that by cutting budgets you will have a better health. Even if you improve management and efficiency and whatever, that doesn't really work that way. So discarding or lowering the priority of public health has certainly been one of the elements feeding the impact of the pandemic. And public health is not only having good hospitals, etc. It's mainly about health as a whole and all aspects of that. And in many ways, the lives we have are not very healthy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is something that, Carlos, we very often talked about. Like for us, it's quite clear the nexus, the interrelations between COVID-19 and the environment. Somehow, both the climate emergency and COVID-19 are, due to human activities, which has led to the environmental degradation. Climate emergency and COVID-19 are not unexpected. We know that. And we also know, for example, that where there is a pollution, that transmission of the virus is much faster and much more, has hit, for example, in northern Italy, it has hit more strikingly the population. And then again, I would propose you the question, like, why governments didn't develop timely and proper anticipation and preparedness plans, because that's the point after all, isn't it?
Well, because to address that, to take that bull by the horns, I think we really have to address something, which is, how do we change the way we think?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and how do we change the way we frame the situations we live? So, I mean, you are absolutely right. It's interesting because at the beginning of the pandemic, many people were saying, "Oh, but this has nothing to do with climate change or environmental issues." Now you don't hear that so much. I mean, there are people need explanations, so you hear conspiracy theories, of course, that the COVID has been produced in a lab, and so. But besides that, now I think it has become more obvious that the COVID has something to do with the way we relate to nature, to ecosystems, and the way we have been destroying at an accelerating pace ecosystems. And it just, I mean, it just comes from the noticing the acceleration, of pandemics, of epidemics coming from that, from destroying a natural ecosystem, and then viruses which had not been in contact with humans become in contact with humans, and so on. But more generally, so you are asking to somebody of the Club of Rome, why didn't government prepare for what has happened? And the Club of Rome is well known. I mean, we have done many things after that, and we are thinking more in the future than in the past. But we are known for having published in 1972 a report titled "The Limits to Growth," which was a simulation of a series of future scenarios, most of which showed dangerous trend towards collapse of civilization. So I would say, why don't we learn what we already know?
Exactly. That's the point.
And because and Rachel Carson, the American biologist, who published in 1962 Silent Spring, and it was even before the Club of Rome, one sign of alarm about the effect of pesticides and on nature, and she said at the time, she said, well, we have all the knowledge we need, just that we don't use it. So in this gap, again, I don't have a closed answer to your question. I think it's more important to have better questions than anything else. But I would go forward along that question, asking, why do we have this gap between what we know, what we are able to consciously know, and what we can learn? Which points to many things, including the fact that from knowing consciously something to learning it, a lot of unconscious processes have to go. I mean, learning is about changing your patterns. So just to make my point clear is, you don't say you learn a language, you have learned a language until you start thinking in that language. And you don't have to be thinking in your own language and translating every word, etc. And that shift happens at the moment, and it's largely unconscious. You may know all the words, but if you don't do that shift, which is unconscious, you haven't learned the new language. And the same, you don't learn dancing through conscious thinking, So our conscious thinking is stuck in frameworks which are outdated. And I say we have to take a leap in sense making. And we haven't done that. The governments haven't done that. And this is why we know many things. We knew this could come, but we weren't putting much effort on that.
You're provoking me, Carlos.
Yes, really, of course.
Very close to me, and you know that, which is...
Yeah, I know.
Overcoming the myth of rationality. Why rationality is so much, I mean, every leader is praised whenever he makes logical decisions. And whomever shows emotions in our society is looked at like as a weak, like a weakness or a soft whatever. Whereas, as you are saying, I mean, all through we are not only consciousness, we are also unconsciousness, and all through the unconscious goes, the capability to change, the capability to imagine, the transformation. So it's about the unconscious. And I also think sometimes I'm very emotional, and you know that. And I have to say that I love it, because emotions for me are an indicator. They are an indicator. They make me feel what's the way forward. They make me feel the overall picture. You know what I mean? Like, I really am. I'm able to be interpreting the reality in a way which gives me the way forward. So why this myth of rationality? Why don't we just pursue a different, as you were saying, it's a matter of mindset, and that should be changed. That should be the need for the change. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and again, the hint I have is that we have to look at not about the myth of rationality itself, which was for sure a very bad idea. Sorry, a very bad idea. But to something which is before that, or which leads to that idea, which is the idea of separation,
Yeah.
and how ingrained is now in all our cultural frameworks. While it is very much against life, Uh, Gregory Bateson used to say that most of our issues come from the differences between the way we think and the way nature or life works. So you don't see separation in in life, in natural systems, in living systems. It doesn't work like that, I mean, to start with, each of us, we are an ecosystem, and we're not one living being. We are an ecosystem, internally and externally. Internally, because we live in a dynamic balance with the zillions of bacteria we have inside us, without which we couldn't live. And the bacteria are other living beings. They are not ourselves, they are other living beings. So we cannot separate ourselves from them. We are an ecosystem. And also externally, because we cannot live, alone. Loneliness is the surest path to death, we cannot live with everything we are around us. So so at some point in the cultural history of humanity, the idea of separation became dominant. I think there are some people we could blame for that. Probably René Descartes would be one of those we could blame, because he structured a whole theory on which was based rationalism and objectivity, and separating ourselves from the objects of our study, and separating emotions from rational thinking, and all that. The fact is that created that framework, created the industrial civilization we have today, and it was, in that sense, it was effective. It was effective in creating, starting with obtaining some scientific results, and you have classical mechanics there, but also in making possible a number of artifacts which made the cultures which mastered that more powerful than others. Because let's not forget that the development of technology has been mostly driven by military considerations, and is still the case today. So these, in a way, this plague of rationalism was extremely effective, and found self-reinforcing mechanisms up to today, and in a way was able up to today to ignore the consequences of the tragedies it was creating, because it has been creating all along tragedies. Don't speak to people from most of the world about the Enlightenment, because what we call in Europe the Enlightenment is the starting point of an era of darkness for them. So, but that industrial civilization, based on that concept of separation, has been very effective up to now. And now we're at the point where the cracks are showing that this civilization is not able anymore to absorb the consequences of the tragedies it is creating, because those consequences are human, and political, if you want. The center of the world is no longer in the West. but are also, and at a level which is beyond what anything that we can control. Those consequences are climate change, um, and and we cannot control that, and it happens as if Gaia, as if the biosphere was reacting to the plague that we are. So I'm not sure how this idea of separation got such a big success in human cultures, because it's against, as I said before, it's against life. It's against the relationship. I mean, think about relationships, real relationships between people. Again, a mother with her kids, it is not based on separation. It's based exactly on the contrary. And this is the leap in sense making that we have to take from separation to relationship.
Yeah, yeah. And I can see a very relevant comment from the audience, from John Cole, who's saying the pandemic revealed just how unprepared and unwilling countries maintain assurances are to handle global emergencies properly. And that's the 2021 Doomsday Clock statement. So that's absolutely what we have been discussed through. So then
but because up to now, I mean, first I noticed that many people, even in the core of the existing system, in the core of the establishment, if you wish, are now lost.
Yeah.
Whatever they say publicly, they feel they don't have, nobody has the recipes for going forward. At the same time, there is still a lot of noise going on about the wonderful futures which are coming with technological innovation. That's another story. We will talk about that at another moment. But there is this growing feeling that, oh, we are lost. We have lost our sense, the sense of what we were doing, our reference, and the pathway forward. My take is that it's true we have lost that, but this is actually good news.
Yeah.
Because it's much worse to be lost and think that you have the roadmap, that the roadmap you have is still good while you are actually lost, than being lost and knowing that you are lost.
Yeah, I agree. That's the first step for something to be rethought somehow. And then, as we were just opening up this debate, with the David Graeber was just saying going back to normal, and you were also saying it yourself. Then we really don't want to go back to normal, because normal was the problem, right? And that showed our fragilities. And as you are saying, that's good that it exposed our fragilities, because then that's from there that we can be restarting, reorienting, reconsidering, reassessing, right? So the ice is thin under our feet, and we're walking through with the risk of going down, because it's breaking down, that's for sure. How can we build up the cracks? How can we have a sound floor?
Well, not for a while, sorry to say. I mean, I'm trying to think in terms which could be useful to walk. This is an appropriate moment to use a quote I use often, which is from Antonio Machado, one of the most famous Spanish poets, when he said, "Walker, there is no way. One makes the way by walking." And I think, I mean, he was a visionary, as poets are, generally speaking. They are able to see, in completely unconscious and emotional ways, by the way, they are able to see realities, the realities that we are maybe not able to grasp rationally. So yeah, so the point is we have. So it's more important for me. People are still trying to imagine a brilliant future and to draw maps. It's not the time of drawing maps because we don't know the territory where we are. It's a time of exploration and discovery at every level, and it's a time, I would say, of exploring together. So it's more important, going on with this metaphor of Machado, which is not even a metaphor. I think it's a good way to formulate it. It's much more important to know how we walk together rather than, I know the destination. No, nobody knows the destination right now. It's the time for experimentation at all levels, and particularly at community levels. It's a time to allow ourselves to get rid of the scripts, because when we say we don't want to come back to normal, it's a mix. We would like to come back to the parts of the normality we had before, which were related to the essential, to the relationships. I really want to come back to the possibility of meeting people and enjoying my time with people and hugging and kissing and so on. But what we don't want to go back to a normality in which the essential was not essential, in which the essential, what we know is essential, was considered as secondary, in which separation and competition and the perception of scarcity, and that we need more and more things to be happy, that was the main, and what is actually essential, which is relationships and collaboration and the perception of abundance, is the essential. So I think this is what is there in that gut feeling that, we don't want to go back to what we had, because we realize that what we had is not taking care of the essential. And in my view, the good news is that we have actually a lot of capacities and knowledge to make this way, to go forward in this way. I know there are many obstacles. The main obstacle is a mental one.
It's mental.
Steve Biko, the leader, the South African leader against apartheid, who was murdered by the regime, said that the most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind, is our minds, it's the mind of the oppressed. And especially this feeling that you cannot, that you are stuck, that you cannot liberate yourself, that you cannot think in other ways. You cannot experiment, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, because we know this will not work. How many times do we prevent ourselves from experimenting something because we have been told this will not work, And I think we have the capacity of people to do that. The moment you get rid of the scripts, you leave the scripts at the cloakroom, you leave the roles, the prescribed roles at the cloakroom, you have a lot of capacity to explore and to start exploring together with others. But also we have a lot of knowledge which comes from, and I see in a way something very interesting, which is not mainstream, to be honest, but still very interesting, which is a convergence between what we know since the beginning of times about the fundamental nature of life, and which is still present, which was present in indigenous cultures and is still alive in many cultures, and this fundamentally relational nature of life. The Africans in Africa, one of the ways to formulate that is Ubuntu, I am because you are.
Ubuntu, I love it. I love it.
We have that, yes, we have that ancient wisdom. It's still alive. And by the way, the peoples who have kept that alive, those are the resilient societies. They have been here for thousands of years. And they have gone through everything. And our industrial civilization is in a good way to destroy itself in 3 centuries. So if you want resilience, look to them. And the second element is that some pieces of modern science are converging with that ancient wisdom. I'm not talking about modern science at large. A lot of that is probably not looking in the right places, or not getting rid of the blind spots, or not changing their frameworks. But I'm talking about cybernetics. I'm talking about large part of anthropology. Dave Graeber, whom we heard before, was an anthropologist. I'm talking about people working on communication. I'm talking about people working on complexity and complexity thinking, and that's modern science. And I see a convergence between those two to give us, tools to try to walk our way, towards different places.
So can I say that if cracks appear and they are there and we can easily break down, there are some instruments. I mean, the glue is, as you were saying, exploration, experimentation, somehow a freedom of mind, unconsciousness, relationship, enjoying the time which is given to us, togetherness, as we're saying, Ubuntu, I am because we are, and convergence. So I would just conclude this very interesting discussion part. Thank you so much. We found a way to be, filling up the cracks. I mean, at least we have some insights, some inputs right now. And that's just the first episode, because we're going to be having a number of episodes together within our, own thin eyes. Now that the cracks are kind of over, I can see, in the long run, we're going to be working on them. And I thank you a lot, Carlos. And I look forward for the next episode. Thank you.
You're welcome, Stefania, and many thanks to you, and of course to the audience who has been patient enough to listen to us. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
The next one.
Yeah, we'll go for the next one. Great.
Good evening to everybody. Enjoy.